Hello, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. See you all joining. Good to have you all here. Just to set the scene a little bit for today's webinar, we run training programs in innovation and collaboration. And we've been finding over the last few months that there's been a big increase in this area from universities and research centres. So lots more interest in it. And it kind of makes sense, I think, because as well as it being generally the direction of travel, we've also had huge upheaval. So there are some real new drivers, I think, from becoming more innovative. So finding solutions for global problems, making a difference from our research with real world applications, being responsive to change and finding new ways of working, doing more with less, always the way, creating routes to new sources of finance and opportunities for institutions and researchers. And we thought it would be great to dig a little bit deeper into innovation and hear from two fantastic speakers. So today we've got Dr. Lizelle Gouverneur and Dr. Andrew Tingy, who have interesting insights to share from their different perspectives to take a look at building a culture of innovation. And I think I've got some great questions lined up for them, but I'd be delighted if you too have got questions that you want to jot into the chat box, and I'll do my best to ask them as we're going through. And please do use the chat box for questions and comments. We usually have lots going on in the chat box, and it's good to share ideas and thoughts and experiences around this topic. So we've been running these CPD webinars since 2019 for anyone interested in the development of researchers. So whether you're a researcher development manager, you're a careers officer, you run an impact accelerator account, you're a DTP or a CDT manager, you're maybe running a large program grant or a research centre, or maybe you work in knowledge exchange or tech transfer or commercialisation, all of you are welcome. It's of great benefit, I think, to have a wide mix of you here. So just to warm up and just to hear a little bit from you before we go into the body of the webinar, it's always nice to hear from you. So this month, I just thought we might want to talk about entertainment, because I have finally caved in to getting a Netflix subscription. So what I'd like to hear from you is something that's been keeping you entertained that you would like to share and recommend to us. So perhaps it's a favourite podcast, a book, a blog, maybe it's some great music that you've come across, a TV programme or a film. What would you recommend? I'm looking for tips and ideas for interesting things to keep me entertained whilst we're all still a little bit stuck indoors. So please do describe it to us in the chat. What's your top tip that would be of interest? I like a bit of science fiction, and since I've subscribed to Netflix last month, I've been watching a series called The 3%. It's maybe a little bit niche. I'm willing to watch pretty much anything sci-fi-ish. And it is dubbed from the Portuguese, which makes it even more kind of slightly out there. But I've been enjoying it. What else have we got? You can all take notes of this. Brooklyn 99, I've heard of that, not watched it yet. Tiger King. See, this is all our guilty pleasures, isn't it? Oh, The Expanse, yes, I like. A bit of podcast, Rhymes with Purple, Call My Agent, yeah. Fantastic. We're going to have some new things to look up, keep us going. Queen of the South. I see there's all these new things. I'm going to be exploring this. This will keep me going. We could probably chat away on this for an hour. But whilst you're bopping those things into the chat box, giving us some nice ideas. Oh, Data Science at Home podcast. Oh, see, lots of interesting things. Right. Let me move on to the webinar, really, just to give you a few guidelines for the webinar to help you get the most out of it. It's jam-packed. We've got 60 minutes. You're on mute, so unfortunately we can't hear you, but we can hear from you in the comments in the chat box. So please do make your questions public so that everyone can see. We're recording it, so the link will be available after the webinar. and please do share that widely, and we have it on our YouTube channel. If you tweet, do feel free to share your thoughts with us on Twitter, tag us in there and be part of the conversation. And our goal really for today is to pick up some new ideas, perhaps a fresh perspective, a new approach, maybe some practical tips that will allow you to create an action as a result of this that will help you to keep moving forward. And I think if that can happen from this webinar, then that would be a really good use of an hour from my perspective, from my point of view. So just to tell you a very little bit about Skillfluence, we've been going for around 5 years. We've trained more than 7,000 researchers and academics and PhD students over the years. We've got a whole range of amazing trainers, real subject matter experts. We've got some of them in chat duty today. So we've got Zach Sorrells, we've got Rachel Clark, and we have Paula Duffy all on chat duty. So there they are saying hi. And we focus on supporting and developing researchers to look outwards. So giving them practical skills in how to communicate, to collaborate, how to innovate and work with or in industry or business or startups. And basically for us, it's all about helping them have an impact and make a difference. And right now we're fully online, but usually it's a bit of a mix of online and in-person events. And whether it's workshops or facilitation. I'm Alison Gray. I gave up my proper secure job in 2015 as I decided it was time for something new and trying to do a little bit of innovation myself and build a culture of innovation for myself. So I set up Skillfluence at that time and we've grown since then, and I can tell you what, I have learned a lot on the way. So that's me introduced myself. A lot of you have introduced yourself as well, which is smashing. Hopefully you're all settled in. You've got your lunch in hand. That's the benefit of webinars. You can be having your lunch in the background. So I think it's about time to hear from our wonderful guests. And the aim really is to share with you some ideas and information on building a culture of innovation. And earlier this year, we ran our 6-week Future Innovators programme for the Perbrite Institute as part of their drive to develop a culture of innovation. I won't tell you about the programme here. I'm more interested to hear from our speakers, to be honest, but perhaps one of the team could share a link to the web page if anyone wants to better understand the content of that programme, because that's the programme. Oh, there we go, Paula's on it. So please let me introduce Lizelle, there we go, Dr. Lizelle Governor. She's been with the Perbrite Institute since 2013, and she's currently managing the knowledge exchange and commercialization team. And she works really closely with researchers to identify, protect, and license intellectual property and to manage commercialization activities. The KEC team also drafts and negotiates a range of research contracts and supports the Institute's engagement and knowledge exchange activities, especially with industrial partners. So prior to joining Perbrite, she worked in the product development team at ABD Serotech, where she licensed in new products and reagents from academic organisations. So over to Lizelle. A very warm welcome, Lizelle. Thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you very much for having me. Hi, everyone.
Brilliant to have you here. Okay, well, I've got loads of questions for you, and as I've said to folk, fire away your questions if you've got any for her. But let's get started thinking about, how things worked at Perbrite. So I'm really interested to find out what prompted you to think about innovation at Perbrite. What was it? What got you thinking about it?
So for a little while now, I've been thinking, I work a lot with our researchers who are engaging with industry and kind of looking at very applied science and research that gets to the market, basically. And as a research institute, we actually quite heavily skewed in that direction. And I have noticed that we've got a few heavy hitters, and I'm sure this is true for many organizations. You have a few people who are very, very good at this, and they're really experienced, and they can get this stuff done. But I'm a bit worried that we don't have enough of a pipeline of people coming up who will be able to replace these big names once they, if they were to leave or retire, for instance. So I've been thinking about kind of development of our early career researchers in that respect and how to engage with industry. And then we actually received a bit of funding from the BBSRC, and it came, well, via the BBSRC, it came from the National Productivity Investment Fund, and it was aimed at developing learning programs or CPD development of early career researchers in innovation and entrepreneurial skills. And we decided eventually, it took us a little while to get this going, but we decided to run the Skillfluence Future Innovators course as part of that training. And yeah, it went really well. I'm very pleased with that. So part of it was that we noticed, the reason why we started this was, part of it was that I noticed that I think we were lacking a little bit of development and knowledge in our junior researchers, and part of it was fortuitous funding.
Yeah, I suppose that's that's what gets you started thinking about it, is if it's actually a possibility to do something about it. So when you got your funding, kind of, how did you get started in terms of, I mean, I know you ended up doing something with Skillfluence, but you know, what was the process kind of going through you and your colleagues' mind about, like, okay, we've got some money here, we kind of know what we want to do. So, you know, where were you looking?
So this is actually interesting, and it kind of speaks to the culture of innovation. Initially, the funding was supposed to be for individuals to develop their own learning programs and maybe go spend time with an industry partner and learn, or maybe something like that. It wasn't supposed to be for kind of general training, like a training course like this. But we actually had very poor uptake. And I think part of the reason was that people didn't know how to do this themselves. And so we spoke with our funder, and they agreed that we could do this general sort of training course first, so that we can at least kind of clarify to people what it is that we're talking about. When we say innovation and entrepreneurial skills, what does that mean? And we did look at various providers. We also considered working with a university. We're a research institute, so we thought that maybe a local university might have some more developed training programs than we did. But in the end, we went with Skillfluence. We liked the program.
Yeah, that's good news for us. So how was that received then? You know, actually, I'm kind of just going to kind of go back to something you said there about the individuals didn't kind of buy into that individual program. I suspect that's something that other people probably find as well. I know that the NPIF funding and IAA funding, you know, sometimes it's difficult to get that kind of engagement with it. Do you think, is there a particular reason for that?
I think researchers are very good at research and finding funding for research, because that's what they've been trained to do. And so when you give them this slightly softer funding, or softer skills development funding, so things like skills development, and we've also got something called the flexible talent mobility account. And those, you know, it's more about the person and the individual, and upskilling a person. Those can be quite difficult for people to get kind of going and off the ground, because they just don't quite know what to do with it. And it's not just the researchers, to be honest. We struggle with that as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think what's hilarious is, like, you know, when I was talking to you and our other speaker, Andrew, you were both like, maybe let's not actually talk about what innovation is. And I'm not going to ask you that question because it's so complex, isn't it? And it's so abstract, and it's just really tough to be able to, like, buy into, you know, apply for innovation funding. It's like, what is that? You know, what would I use it for? So anyway, okay, I think, you know, it's interesting to understand that. So the Future Innovators program that we ran with you, now that ran over 6 weeks. How was that received? You know, like, how did that work?
So we had, I think, it was about 24 attendees, people who registered. So, and I think most of them stuck the course. I think we only had one person drop out, and most of them were there every single week. And I think they were very engaged. It was aimed at early career researchers and students, and they were very eager. And I was really pleased. I also joined into the sessions to see how it all went. And I was really pleased to see that these were people with just brilliant ideas. And part of the problems that they have are things like, where do I find funding for all these fabulous ideas I have? But that's a different problem. But I think it was very well received by our researchers. And I actually should say that as part of that, something that kind of followed on from that is a sort of subset of that group have actually established their own little brainstorming, idea generating group, where they meet well, they've only met once so far because it's very new, but in theory, they'll meet once a month. And someone will have maybe a rough idea of a research project or some problem that they're having. And there's a discussion between these peers about, yeah, people give ideas. And apparently the first one went really, really well. Yeah, I think it went really great.
Yeah, I mean, that's brilliant. That's the kind of dream scenario, isn't it? Where you're not having to drive, you set them off in a direction and help them to build capacity. And then they're actually starting to make those moves themselves and create that. I suppose that's where the culture bit perhaps comes from. Yeah, I mean, I think I was looking back at the engagement from your group, and it was like 97% across the whole program, which is pretty amazing. I think you mentioned to me also that someone actually left the institution. Is that right? And just share that if you don't mind.
Listen, I didn't know. I mean, the one thing, we're not a big institute, but I don't know everyone. And so some of the people I didn't recognize, and I saw the name at the end and I couldn't quite figure out who he was, and asked around, and it turned out that he'd actually left the institute 2 or 3 weeks earlier, but he kept coming to all the sessions.
That's commitment. That's brilliant. I love it. So you mentioned, since you ran the program, there's been a brainstorming group set up. Anything else? What are the other kind of outcomes that you've seen or that you think that you might be beginning to see? Because it's not that long ago. I mean, it was only the beginning of the year, so it's early days.
Yeah, it is still early days. So I'd love to see this brainstorming group, well, stay put and also hopefully develop a little bit more. At the moment, it's quite a small group, and I think there'd be value if other postdocs can join in that, and if there's even potential for in the future for maybe similar kind of groups with other organizations, so we can get some really multidisciplinary kind of thinking going. In general terms, because I have noticed that from that training and from other conversations that we've had, is that postdocs, and I'm sure this is true for all postdocs, career development is a tricky thing for them. And so trying to at an organizational level, look at how can we help them develop skills, both in innovation and entrepreneurial side of things, but also on the more traditional research skills for what they'll need if they want to stay in academia.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you attended the program yourself. Did you find that useful? I mean, why did you do that, and was it helpful?
It was helpful. I mean, partly I wanted to see how people interacted, and I also was interested to know what they thought. So I kind of figured, and I was right about this, in their questions that they asked Zach, who was the trainer on that course, I figured out the sort of information they were lacking, what they didn't know. And so I realized, for instance, that my own visibility in the Institute is not high enough. I tend to work with people at a fairly senior level, and their postdocs don't always know who I am and what we do as a team. So there's a bit of work for me to be done there. And on a personal level, yes, I found it interesting. Innovation is not just about research. It's a way of thinking, and it was really helpful to be able to put a bit of a structure to that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting to increase your visibility and, people to be aware of who you are, and it's all part of that creating the culture, basically. Yeah. We've got some sort of nice questions coming in here. So Ken Scott at Edinburgh has asked, just wondering if it could be that researchers are a bit nervous about moving up the TRL, the kind of the TRL level, so they maybe don't jump at some of the sources of funding that might require more tangible value story or business benefit outcomes. Do you think there's anything in that, a little bit of a nervousness about not being sure at what they might be expected to achieve?
Yeah, I find that the nervousness from researchers are often in getting engagement with industry and talking to industry. So people will ask me to sit in on meetings because they think they need me, but they really don't. They just need a little bit of moral support in how do you talk to this, for them, alien being on the other side of science. But that's going to be different for universities, because as a research institute, we do tend to be more applied science, strategically focused. So we probably do a bit less fundamental research than universities do. Though we do some, and some researchers definitely, that's their comfort zone, which is fun. That's also, it's also valuable.
Yeah. And I mean, do you think there's been value in people coming together though? So like maybe if they've been doing it individually, are there elements they might have missed in that kind of opportunity to all sort of be learning together?
Absolutely. The way that research works is people tend to stick to their groups, or the groups that are the most closely related to them. But you can get a great value from people in a slightly different field. I mean, it might not be that different, but they still have other knowledge that you might never have thought about. And that's where truly innovative thinking comes from. So this is one part of the reason why I'm quite excited about this little postdoc group that started up, because these are people who otherwise might not really interact on a professional level.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's fantastic that they've seen value in keeping going with that, because we know how time poor researchers are. So if they're willing to take the time, they clearly see a value in that. What do you think they're kind of hoping to get out of that? What do you think their direction of travel is?
I think they're hoping to get some really good research ideas to start with. But that's what people were mostly focusing on, is how do I, as a postdoc, get into kind of grant writing and running my own group, basically. You know, they wanted to develop their careers in that direction. So I think they're hoping to get some good ideas for research funding.
Yeah.
But I also hope that it then expands to maybe something slightly beyond that. There was quite a few people who were particularly interested in the more sort of applied science and industry engagement, commercialized things. So I think it'll happen.
Yeah, yeah. There's another couple of questions that's come in, one from Alina, and also Rachel's kind of commented on it as well, Rachel Brown, just about people, researchers maybe being a wee bit nervous about sharing ideas, you know, and how do you keep the conversation open, but make sure that they know that their ideas won't be, you know, taken by others.
So internally, so with this research, this postdoc group that has established, I did join them for their first meeting, which was more about kind of how the logistics of how it would work. And I did make a point of bringing exactly that up. How do we do this? That one person comes up with an idea, someone else improves it, who gets the credit, so to speak?
Yeah.
And they were all on the same page, that the person who initiates the conversation will be the lead grant writer, if that's the way it goes, and they will work nicely together when it comes to co-eyes or whatever is an appropriate situation. And that's the rule. And if someone wasn't happy with that rule, then they can't join the group. So I'm hoping that they keep that up and that it works.
Yeah.
An external level, of course, just get a confidentiality agreement in place.
Simple as that. Yeah. No. But that's really nice that they've basically been setting some ground rules around how they're actually going to manage that themselves. And that's the kind of thing, if you are trying to create a culture, that you kind of need that they're all on the same page. And yeah, Alina's kind of said it's about a supportive, collaborative group. Yeah, yeah, because it can be a competitive environment out there. So it's nice when people find ways of making sure that they can work together. So, I mean, for you, what now? I mean, what's your kind of next steps in terms of creating this culture of innovation and you know, moving forward with it?
So there's a few different directions this can take. I mean, we're still thinking about engaging more with our local university, which is the University of Surrey, in terms of development of researchers. We already have a bit of joint efforts with them in terms of seminars that people can go to, etc. So I think that's a logical next step for us. Also, I think there could be a logical next step for us personally to work with some of our other BBSRC institutes. So these are people who get funded in the same way that we do, but they don't do exactly the same research that we do. So it could be really good for cross-disciplinary type work. I am thinking about a bit of a program of development training for our researchers. I need to talk to our training team about this, or learning and development team about this. And that might now slow down because I think there's a bit of a restructure going on there. But I'd love to see some more sort of training about how to deal with business. And we've already done some bits on IP. So we do those on a semi-regular basis. And I want to do some more work with our students as well. We do already give them some information, but I think they could do with a bit more. So mostly focusing on the sort of training development side of it, on that side. And we're also, as an institute, just And part of the KEC remit is that we're looking at our commercialization efforts.
Yeah.
I think as part of that, we will look at the internal, as we spoke about earlier, the internal marketing of what the team does, so that people start thinking about that a bit more.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's quite a lot of different ways in which you could see it moving forward, and it'll be kind of exploring that. I mean, something that you mentioned that you would be interested to know is, you know, how people do that with other organizations, you know, how you're kind of talking about potentially looking for opportunities to collaborate with other institutions. So, you know, how do they innovate with each other to create a more innovative culture? So anyone that's got any thoughts on that, I would welcome their, you know, like, feel free to share if you've got ideas or even examples of where that's happened, or if anyone's interested in having a conversation around that, because I think it can be really hard to get those conversations going. And I suspect that now it's harder than ever because everything's been online. So there's less of those kind of bumping into new people. And
yeah, but I also think that sometimes you just have to ask the question. I mean, as I say, I was amazed at some of the truly brilliant ideas that some of our researchers had in this training. So I'm willing to bet if you throw this kind of question at them, maybe I need to crash their little brainstorming group actually with my problem. They'll come up with some really creative ways of doing this, I'm sure.
Yeah, I am sure they would welcome the opportunity of like helping come up with ideas around that. That's a cool idea. And so I guess my kind of final question for you is, you know, what would be your top tip or piece of advice, I guess, for someone else who's wanting to really think about creating a culture of innovation?
But you asked me this before, and I find it a very difficult question. But I think one of the things I would say is do have a conversation with the people you're trying to reach, because if you're trying to force them to do something that they are not interested in, you're going to struggle. So find out what they want. And even if that isn't exactly what you think they need, it still might be the way in, the way to get them started, as opposed to kind of, I don't know, throwing out a training course and hoping that it sticks.
Yeah, yeah. So that kind of getting buy-in.
Yeah.
And is that something that you kind of think, so buy-in from the potential, is it all the stakeholders that you need to have bought into that? Does that include kind of up the way as well as to the, you know, the folk that potentially coming along to
I
the
think it
program?
would probably be really helpful to talk to someone who's been there and who's done it, and say to them, well, if you had a bit of help, what would you have liked to see, you know, 5 or 10 years ago in your own path?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's it. All right. I mean, that's been really interesting. I am, you know, excited to see where things go at Perbrite, because there just felt like there was a lot of energy around innovation, and, you know, there was kind of real interest and enthusiasm from people, and you can't make that happen just, you know, like, people have got to make that happen for themselves. Well, maybe you can, because you've created that space and that environment that kind of allows them to do that, which I think is amazing. So, you know, well done for creating that capacity that allows them to kind of take things forward. So thank you very much. And I will look forward to seeing how it all develops in the future. Thanks, Lizelle.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Fantastic. That's just really interesting, isn't it? Just hearing a kind of perspective of how it's worked, and that people have actually bought into that. Now, please let me introduce my second guest. I should try and just share my screen with you so that you can. There we go. Hopefully you can see that okay. Please let me introduce my second guest today. It's Dr. Andrew Tingy, and I've also some great questions lined up for him. But again, anything you want to know or ask about, please do jot it into the chat box. It's great to hear your thoughts. Now, Andrew has got a background in biochemistry. He's worked in technology commercialization for nearly 25 years. He's the former director of Imperial Innovations Limited and led the team that sourced, developed and licensed new technologies in the healthcare sector from Imperial College London. He's a whole range of experience in corporate licensing and research and development roles. And he's very recently gone out on his own, brave, to create his own venture offering freelance and interim consultancy services around intellectual property transactions. And that's a new consultancy called Broad Arrow Consulting. So a very warm welcome to Andrew. It's great to have you here. There you are. Fab, welcome.
Thank you very much, Alison. Yeah, it's great to be here, and I've been really impressed by the questions that keep popping up in the chat.
I know there's great, isn't it? Great questions. We might come back round to those, but I've got a couple that I'll get to just to start us off. You know, something I'm sort of really interested in understanding, and I think you've got a kind of broad view here, is what is the role of researchers in innovation?
I think that's a really great question. It is hard to answer without touching on what innovation is, but we don't want to go down that road. What I'd say is if we accept that innovation is about, you know, new development or making things better in some way or new, then I think a lot of the output comes as either a goal of academic research or indeed as a byproduct or almost an offshoot of it. So there is I think there is a belief sometimes amongst academic researchers that this is an either-or thing. You can either do translational work or innovative work, or you can pursue an academic career. I would argue that it's actually mutually reinforcing. And most of the people that I've worked with that are good at innovation in this context are also excellent academics as well. And doing that has not affected their academic career in any way. In fact, it's enhanced it. And I think from a big corporate perspective, having worked in a big corporate, there is a recognition that not all the great ideas that are going to help your business come from within your own R&D function. And actually, there's a big wide world out there and people are doing really interesting things. And then the trick is getting access to it and working out, I think as somebody else put in there in a question, how you integrate it into your existing product portfolio, which is, of course, a big task in itself.
Yeah, you made lots of interesting points. I'm going to pick up on one of them, just about you kind of mentioning that it can actually enhance research careers. What do you mean by that? How do you see it, you know, doing that for people?
I think it opens up new horizons for you. I think, you know, there's the opportunity to do collaborative research, of course, and you can get access to facilities and money and all the other kind of goodies that big companies have in order to pursue things that actually might be very difficult in your academic context. Yeah. And I think generally the two activities or two branches of what you do actually spark off each other and sort of cross-fertilize, if I'm mixing my metaphors there, in order to really give you new ideas and take your research in new directions as well. Yeah. So I think it is just a mutually reinforcing activity.
Yeah. And just sort of look at, there's lots of interesting things in the chat box, and I'll come back to some of them hopefully, but Sean's mentioned funding can be a really good vehicle for driving conversations between people. Is that something that, you know, if people are thinking more innovatively, then there are more opportunities there?
I think that's absolutely right. And I think most of the people who've joined this webinar will be aware that, you know, grant applications these days often have a big section on there which talks about impact, right? So in other words, if we fund this, what are you going to do with it after you've spent the money and developed all this interesting stuff? You know, where is this headed? What is the application of it? So it's of interest to funders as well. And the more contact you have with industry, the more you've kind of, you know, taken your work in that direction, the better answers you come up with to those sorts of questions. And it actually sort of strengthens your grant applications, in my view.
Yeah, I would agree. And what would you say are the kind of outputs or benefits of innovation?
Well, I think I think there was a great question earlier on about, you know, how do you measure it? How do you measure success on this? And there's all sorts of traditional metrics, you know, like patents filed and companies formed and things like that, you know, invention disclosures received, and they're all kind of they're bits and pieces that give you an indication of what's going on. But really, you know, invention disclosures is probably the most, or the best, let's say, indicator of sort of activity, general activity in your research base. But filing patents, well, you know, it's pretty easy to file lots of patents if you want to, if you've got the budget for it. Why are you doing it is a much better question. And equally, you know, founding companies, you can set up a whole lot of companies that just cease trading in 12 months because they couldn't raise investment. So really, you know, is that innovation? Is that actually helping, or is this actually making sure that your institution looks good when it comes to totting up the metrics and producing the league tables and things like that? I think that there's two things here. The best outputs are narrative based. So in other words, case studies. What has actually happened as a result of the activities? What tangible benefits have there been? And secondly, I think you need to look at innovation in a wide context, or impact in a wide context. So it's not just about making money. That's a common misconception. I think it's a lot more about things like influencing public policy. If you look at Imperial's pandemic modelling teams, they've all had a big influence on government policy, and they've fed into SAGE committees and things like that. And they put the whole country into lockdown to control the spread of COVID. They didn't make any money out of that, but their work directly led to changes in government policy. So I think that's a very valid output. You can also start up not-for-profit or social enterprises based on IP on occasions, but not there to make a big profit, but to somehow do something which is not being done at the moment by any other organization. So there you've got another great example of a sort of innovative approach. And certainly there was, almost an informal agreement amongst the top universities, top tech transfer offices, that we were not going to use the pandemic to leverage IP. So lots of interesting innovations were made available, even though there was IP behind them, royalty-free, or very few number of restrictions on them, and just putting them out there to try and solve problems. And I think that effort has been recognised by the government in the UK as well. Yeah.
And I think it is really important to look at innovation in the widest sense, in terms of the impact it can have, and that it isn't, yes, we want to be able to measure it, but it is about the difference it can make in a whole wide range of things. So what does a culture of innovation actually look like, do you think?
That's a really good question.
Such neat questions, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, what does a culture of innovation look like? I think if you've got a thriving culture of innovation, obviously the outputs are going to look good. In other words, there's lots of activity happening, as we already discussed, but just sort of, having lots of patents filed, as I said just now, is not going to be enough. I think actually you need something a bit wider than that, because, and again, this has been hinted at in the chat, that disclosing an invention is one thing, but it's what happens afterwards and the journey that inventor goes on, which is really important. What support systems are in place? The current vogue term is ecosystem. I don't particularly like that, because as most people on here will know, ecosystems have predators and things like that, which is probably not a helpful analogy when you talk about trying to develop an innovative culture. But indeed, what is around it? Okay, what is the quality of your tech transfer office? Are they going to help you? Are they know what to do with your idea? Have they got the imagination to make it happen? The skill set to make it happen? Have you got access to capital? What is the funding environment like within your institution and around it? Do spin outs from your institution go on and raise money? And who helps them with that? Who gets them in front of investors and things like that? Is there an incubator? So your fledgling company can start off literally with a desk, and then might have a small lab or shared lab space, and then can actually grow a little bit and take more lab space and start to expand as it's successful. And it are all these bits, of the jigsaw that you need to become successful available to you. How easy is it going to be to attract in quality management to your company? And all these sort of other skills you need around it, like, accountancy and HR and all these things as you expand. All these things have to be in place, or opportunities will only ever get to a certain level and then they'll sort of stall. So yes, it's having that sort of jigsaw surrounding you, and the environment around you, ecosystem, if you want to call it that, is a really key success factor.
Yeah, I'm going to have to rethink how I use the term ecosystem now that you have quite rightly pointed out there's predators in there and everything. I'm going to have to be careful with that in future. That's a really...
It's what puts me off it, yeah.
Yeah. I think, is that something, so at Imperial, they would have the resources to have much of that in-house. Is that something that, that you're able to get from outside sources as well? So it doesn't necessarily all have to be kind of in-house supports that are there?
Yeah, it can come from outside, and does often. I mean, organizations such as yours provide a lot of valuable training, and that's a key component of it as well. And indeed, actually, sometimes external sources of information or help are more popular than the in-house TTO. which people can be quite skeptical about from time to time. So yeah, you've got to sort of spread the net broadly. There's no shortage of sort of advice and contribution out there, but you've got to sift, as a researcher, you've got to sift the wheat from the chaff, work out what is going to help you, who is going to help you, and really listen to them and take on board what's being said.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, how do you actually create that culture then of innovation? You're sort of building on what you're saying there. How do you go about creating that culture?
Well, I think it's the sort of almost the corollary of what I said in terms of the structures. I think your job as somebody who facilitates commercialization or innovation is to make the process as painless as possible. If you confront somebody who's perhaps just put in an invention disclosure for the first time, or has talked to somebody about their idea for the first time with 50 forms that they then have to fill in, that's a massive turn off, because even before they've started doing anything at all, you've just confronted them with a whole load of bureaucracy, right? So it's about making it painless, but being a guide, somebody with imagination who's focusing on the endpoint, a problem solver, give them some quality help, point out what support is available to them along the way. So, you're not on your own here. There's lots of things around here to help you, and things that you can access, which will, load the dice in your favor for success, let's say. And I think the most important thing as well is to celebrate success stories. I mean, this does go well, quite often, actually, and unfortunately quite often, because this tends to be sort of pre-competitive type work. A lot of it happens under the radar, and you sign some quite important deals without being able to actually make a big fuss about it. And the big splash stories on the front page of the website tend to be research breakthroughs and things like that. Not so often good examples of commercialization. And I think when you are able to publicize that, you should do, and there should be recognition for the inventors concerned, because it is, somebody has pointed out, it's a tough environment out there. Not everything succeeds. When it does, it should be celebrated. And I think that the best people to promote that culture are actually the people that are making the innovation themselves. So people are identifying with their peers. So it's not something that somebody else does, it's something I can do. Yeah. And if a concrete example, I once commercialized a piece of software many years ago that the inventor of the software, developer of the software, felt that he didn't have any value. And ultimately that was integrated into a computer design system for a global medical device company. Okay, and it was financially good for the inventor, but secondarily he could see the patient benefit that came from it. And he said to me, after all the dust had settled on it, well, you should write this up as a case study. And I said, actually, I prefer if you wrote it up as a case study and then presented it in your department, because I want 10 more people like you, not just you, right? So, and there's nothing more powerful than peers telling their stories, and they can be warts and all the things didn't quite go so well, so that people can learn from it in amongst their peer group. So I think that really helps.
Yeah, I think that's massively important. It is that kind of, you're there creating capacity, but it's better if they can tell their own story, because it'll resonate more strongly with their peers. So, yeah. So they'll get it. We've got loads of interesting things. So Christabel, hi Christabel, has said they've had some interesting things going on. She's found that they've got some good innovation projects that are emerging from work that they're doing, and it's a way to upskill staff. So that's something that I'm kind of, from training perspective, interested in. Are there any skills gaps that you see for researchers when it comes to the innovation process?
Well, they're the obvious ones that I guess, you're going to be out of your comfort zone in some respects if you start talking about intellectual property and about how investment works and about forming a company and all those other kind of things around with it, or what key terms in a license agreement are, all this kind of stuff. But actually, one of the most common skills gaps I've come across is actually more the sort of softer skills, because doing business or innovating inevitably involves collaborating and working with other partners, and this can involve interacting with people a lot, communicating and explaining what your innovation is to people who are not necessarily technical experts in your field. So you've got to be detailed enough to explain to them what the value proposition is, put simply, why am I interested in your technology, but not so detailed that you just completely swamp them with a whole load of technical detail up front. And if you're an investor, your main concern is going to be, okay, how much needs to go in and what do I get out after a certain period of time, not what it does in the meantime, right? That's means to an end, and it's important, it's got to be credible, but it's not the main thing I'm thinking about. And an overly technical presentation can be an absolute death knell to getting investment. So it's a balancing act. It always is, and certainly development of soft skills, developing an elevator pitch, being able to explain your work succinctly to almost a lay audience is something that occasionally I see people struggle with.
Yeah, that's generous. Occasionally you see them struggle. I think that's definitely something I recognize as being an area where people maybe just have not had the time to spend on thinking about that, and maybe very task orientated, thinking about what needs to be done, and very information rich rather than trying to get the message across to gain buy-in from people. Because I think when you've got an innovation, when you've got an idea, that's absolutely, you're kind of looking to get buy-in for it
That's
from
right.
a whole range of people. So when that's done well, how does that work when it's done well? I mean, what difference does that make?
I think you see that, for example, if you're building a commercial proposition, the inventors or the innovators will rapidly be able to build a team around that, and it will require a team to get it somewhere. And that team will all be on the same page in terms of strategy, understanding what the next steps are, and whatever their functional discipline is, be it a patent attorney, be it a finance person, be it a CEO or whatever, will know and understand where you're trying to get to and be able to help with that. And it is about communicating in sort of almost slightly different languages for those functional disciplines about what you're trying to do and where you're trying to get to. And those professionals will help you along the way. But I see, where that's happening effectively, there's a real close connection and a good gelling around the team. There's no sort of outlier, and everything is aligned. All the sort of strands of IP strategy, fundraising strategy, everything is all aligned and heading in the same direction.
Yeah. I think it's obviously hit a nerve with people about celebrating success and recognition, and so that was something I wanted you to ask you about, because when we talked about this before, you had a really smashing story of something successful, and I'd love it if you would share that, your kind of favorite success story from your work.
Absolutely. Well, it is one. There are many that I could talk about, but I'm not allowed to talk about for various reasons. But probably the biggest one, and the one which did get a press release, and the one we were very proud of, was Imperial Innovations' role in partnering a new therapy for cystic fibrosis that came out of the so-called Gene Therapy Consortium, which is a collaboration between Imperial, Oxford and Edinburgh scientists, many scientists involved in this. And Imperial Innovations were heading up the commercialization effort. 3 years ago, that program was partnered with a company called Boehringer Ingelheim, who are a top 10 pharma company, headquarters in Germany. And they could see the potential of this. Cystic fibrosis, awful disease, no current cure, the ways of managing it, but it's very unpleasant, debilitating disease for the people that are unfortunate enough to suffer it. And it's a genetic disease. You're born with it, essentially. So the role of this technology is literally to replace the defective gene using a modified virus. It is massively forward-looking. It's a so-called advanced therapy. So there's no track record of this kind of thing working. The virus itself is quite complex, and yet, through many years of research effort, and indeed some things that didn't go quite so well in the early days developing the technology, the researchers have stuck with it. A lot of them are clinicians, and they can see the need in the clinic every day and are absolutely driven to make this a success. And they've fully embraced working with the pharma industry because they know that is where the resource is going to come from to actually turn this into a treatment and do the clinical trials and all the stuff that's necessary. So despite the fact it's complex, despite the fact there's a huge amount of IP involved in it, different institutions and everything, got that deal over the line, and that is likely to go into the clinic within the next couple of years. And so within 2 years, I'd say from now, patients will actually start to see the benefit of that science. It's not going to stay as a Nature paper or a science paper that people go, oh, yeah, that's a nice piece of work. That's very interesting. It will actually help patients to recover. And to have played a small part in that, the academics and the inventors played a much bigger part, as have Boehringer, is incredibly satisfying. You know, and the fact that we could actually talk about it as well and say, look, this is a fantastic piece of science that now there's a very good collaboration which is going extremely well between Boehringer and our research teams. That's very satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing, you know, story to be able to share, because it's just extraordinary to be able to have that significant kind of impact in people's lives, and be part of that. You know,
absolutely.
and everyone within that's playing a role. So, I suppose hearing from you today and speaking to you last week, you know, I really got a sense of the kind of pride you felt in being part of that team, and, you know, the system that can make a real difference to people. So it's just really nice to share that. And we had been talking celebration, so it felt like a good one. So my final question for you, top tip or piece of advice for creating a culture of innovation?
Yep. Okay. So it is about that, what I would say, sort of recognition and reward. Okay. So quite often when you're talking to an audience of academics, let's say, and you're talking about innovation or IP or, you know, potential applications of their work, they're going to say, well, you know, what's in it for me, really? You know, because I have enough to do all day. I signed up to this to do research. I have to teach undergraduates, which a lot of them don't like, but they have to do it anyway. And now you're telling me, oh, I've got to do all this stuff as well. The point is, you're not telling them they have to do it. Right? This is an activity which is completely voluntary. They've got to be interested enough in it, and it's got to be a painless enough process for them to sort of keep trying, even if it doesn't work first time around, and there is a failure or whatever. So I think the rewards that are on offer have to be commensurate with that. And if your host institution is taking the lion's share of anything that comes out of it in terms of royalties or whatever, you've got a very hard sell to the academics as to why they should bother at all. Okay, but if they are going to get the lion's share, there is a financial motivation, although that shouldn't be the primary one, as we've discussed, but also the fact that, yeah, hey, you know, I wouldn't mind my research getting partnered with a drugs company and being on the front page of Imperial's website. You know, that looks pretty good to me. So, you know, it's a major achievement to do this stuff. There'll be a real world impact from it in whatever discipline you work, if it's successful. And that, I think, deserves recognition. And I think that is a contributing factor, let's say, to creating this culture. And that's the one bit of advice that I would definitely put forward. Celebrate your successes, you know, state what's happened and how good it is and why it's going to matter, but also get your reward and recognition schemes right internally so that your researchers benefit from it.
Yeah, I think that is a really nice way of putting it, that kind of recognition and rewards. Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Andrew. That's been really interesting to hear your perspective.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much for taking part. And feel free to have a look at the chat box and see if there's any comments you want to respond to, because there's loads of interesting things in there. So thank you very much, and best of luck with your new venture. So sounds like it's going really well already.
Thanks you very much. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, let me just share my screen again with you so that you've got it there. So here's my thoughts on what we've been talking about, really. It's been fascinating to hear from our two speakers. I think for me, the key points that really came through are that innovation is a kind of a way of future-proofing research. It can make a real difference. It can have a lasting impact and legacy. And creating a culture of innovation is involving, you know, it requires a collaborative approach. You can't just be about the ones who currently get it. It's about drawing in others to the wider group to make change and work together and help each other. And one of the ways that you can do that is through reward and recognition. And that's got to be within the group as well as external, for it to be really, you know, to really resonate with the people that you're trying to reach and create that culture within. And my sense also is that, building on what's been said, is that if we're successful, that creating a culture of innovation has got a much wider ranging benefit as well, around creating a supportive, a collaborative and an energizing environment to work in. So I think that's my kind of thoughts on it. Thank you very much for joining us. Please let me tell you about another event that we've got coming up, which is our next CPD webinar, which is all about imposter syndrome, which I think will hit a chord with many, many people. I'm not sure there's many folk out there who haven't had a wee sense of imposter syndrome on occasion. If you've not used a QR code before, you just need to open your camera on your mobile phone and you hold it up to the QR code on the screen, and as if by magic, it will automatically recognize it without you having to do anything. It's great. You don't have to take a picture. You'll see it just focus in and it'll ask you if you want to go to the page. It's great, great little tool. We're also hopefully putting the link in the chat box. Let me just check. I suspect it's probably already. There we are. Paula's ahead of the game. She's got it in there already. Yeah, so this was, next one's on imposter syndrome. Due to, you know, popular demand, really, there was a lot of interest around this, and it's come up in 2 or 3 of our recent webinars, and we just felt, right, we need to focus in on that. We've got a fantastic speaker coming along to that, Dr. Hannah Roberts, who's also one of our trainers. So do come along to join us in July and hear some more on that. And just to finish up, there's a short evaluation, just 3 questions. I'm looking at Zach said culture is the key. He's right, culture is the key. So there's a short evaluation when you leave the webinar. Really appreciate your feedback, so please do let us know what you thought. Give us some ideas for what would be helpful for you in future. I think we'll hopefully put the link for the evaluation into the chat box, and there we go. This is magical, isn't it? It's just pops up there. There's only 3 questions, so it's been fascinating to hear from our 2 speakers today. A huge thank you to Lizelle and to Andrew for taking the time to talk to me today. I've found it really helpful. I've gained some new ideas, some insights and learning, and some actions around that. And I hope you've also got a bit of reassurance that you're not on your own. This is a process that a lot of organisations and people are thinking about. Thanks also to the Skillfluence team, to Paula, Joanne, Rachel and Zach, who've all been here making sure the webinar runs smoothly. A huge thank you to all of you for joining us and for all the interesting questions and chat. Please do feel free to keep in touch. Contact me if you've got any questions. You can see my email address up there. Any training queries or ideas for future webinars. If you'd like to find out more about what we do at Skillfluence, then please do email me, or you can check us out on www.skillfluence.co.uk, and thank you for joining us and hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you and bye.